The room went silent the moment my father-in-law opened that envelope. 40 years of marriage. 40 years of Sunday dinners, anniversary parties, grandchildren's birthdays, and family portraits hung in gilded frames. All of it unraveled in the time it took to read 3 sentences on a piece of paper. My name is Claudia, and this is the story of how my husband tried to humiliate me and ended up destroying his own family instead. I met Vincent Crawford when I was 24 years old, fresh out of nursing school and working the night shift at Memorial General. He came into the ER one Tuesday evening with a gash on his forehead, a construction accident, he said, though later I'd learn he'd been in a bar fight defending his younger brother's honor. He was charming in that effortless way some men are. Dark eyes that crinkled when he smiled. A voice like warm honey poured slow. He asked for my number before the stitches were even dry, and I gave it to him without a second thought. We dated for 2 years before he proposed. His family welcomed me with open arms, or so I believed. His mother, Alina, was an elegant woman with silver hair and impeccable taste. She hosted dinner parties that felt like scenes from a magazine. His father, Henry S.R., was a retired attorney with a commanding presence and a laugh that filled every room he entered. And Vincent's younger brother, Marcus, was quiet and kind, the gentle soul of the family. The Crawfords were old money, not wealthy enough to be careless, but comfortable enough to be proud. They had a family home in Westchester, a summer cottage in the Hamptons, and a reputation in their community that stretched back 3 generations. When Vincent proposed to me on the dock of that summer cottage, with the sunset painting the water gold, I thought I was stepping into a fairy tale. I didn't realize I was stepping into a minefield. The first 5 years of our marriage were good. Not perfect, but good. Vincent worked long hours at his father's law firm, determined to prove he'd earned his position rather than inherited it. I continued nursing, eventually moving to the maternity ward where I could witness the miracle of new life every single day. We bought a brownstone in Brooklyn, close enough to visit his parents but far enough to feel like our own world. We talked about children constantly. Vincent wanted 3, maybe 4. A big family like the one he grew up in. I wanted to wait until we were ready, financially stable, emotionally prepared. But by our 3rd anniversary, I felt the pull too. That deep biological ache to hold a child of my own. I got pregnant the winter I turned 29. The pregnancy was perfect. No morning sickness, no complications, just the steady, miraculous growth of life inside me. Vincent was attentive in those months, bringing me tea in the mornings, rubbing my swollen feet at night, reading baby books aloud while I drifted in and out of sleep. Our daughter, Lily, was born on a rainy April morning. 7 pounds, 6 ounces, a head full of dark curls and eyes the color of storm clouds. She looked nothing like Vincent, everyone said so. She had my complexion, my mother's nose, my grandmother's delicate chin. "She's all you," Vincent said the first time he held her, smiling. Not a trace of Crawford in her. At the time, it sounded like a compliment. I didn't know it was a seed of doubt being planted. The comments started small. "She still doesn't look like me," Vincent would say, watching Lily sleep in her crib. "Babies change," I'd reply. "Give her time. My mother thinks she looks like your side of the family, entirely." I didn't think much of it. Babies often resembled one parent more than the other. My own brother looked nothing like our father until he turned 12, and then suddenly they were twins separated by 30 years. But the comments didn't stop. They grew. By Lily's first birthday, Vincent had started making jokes that didn't feel like jokes. "Are you sure they didn't switch her at the hospital?" he'd say, laughing, but his eyes never laughed with him. "Maybe the milkman stopped by 9 months before she was born," he'd say to his brother, and Marcus would look away, uncomfortable. I started to notice other things too. The way Vincent would study Lily's face when he thought I wasn't watching. The way he'd compare her photos to his own baby pictures, frowning. The way he'd fallen silent when his mother made comments about genetics and family resemblance. Something was shifting in my husband. Something cold was growing where warmth used to live. I told myself I was imagining it. I told myself he was just tired, stressed, adjusting to fatherhood. I told myself that marriages went through phases, and this was just a difficult one. But deep down, in that quiet place where women know things before they can name them, I felt the ground beneath my feet beginning to crack. The first real fight happened 3 months after Lily's first birthday. We were in the kitchen, cleaning up after dinner, and Vincent had been quiet all evening. The kind of quiet that fills a room with pressure, like the air before a thunderstorm. "I want a paternity test," he said suddenly. I dropped the dish I was holding. It shattered on the tile floor, pieces scattering in every direction. "What?" He didn't look at me, just kept wiping down the counter, his movements slow and deliberate. "You heard me. I want a DNA test for Lily." I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. The words hung in the air between us like something physical, something I could reach out and touch if I tried. "Vincent," I finally managed. "She's your daughter." "Then prove it." "I shouldn't have to prove it. You're her father. You were there when she was born. You cut the cord. She doesn't look like me, Claudia." His voice was flat, cold. "She doesn't look like anyone in my family, and I need to know." "Know what? That I've been faithful to you for 7 years, that I've never so much as looked at another man." The tears came before I could stop them. "How can you ask me this?" He turned to face me then, and there was something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Suspicion, accusation. The kind of doubt that poisoned marriages from the inside out. "Because I need to be sure," he said. "And if you have nothing to hide, you'll agree." I didn't sleep that night. I lay in the dark beside my husband, listening to his breathing, wondering how we had arrived at this moment. 7 years of marriage. 7 years of shared meals, shared dreams, shared struggles. And now he lay beside me like a stranger, convinced I had betrayed him in the most fundamental way possible. The worst part wasn't his accusation. The worst part was that I knew with absolute certainty that Lily was his daughter. I had never been unfaithful. I had never even been tempted. Vincent was the only man I had ever loved, the only man I had ever been with since we started dating. But how do you prove a negative? How do you prove something didn't happen? I agreed to the test. Not because I had anything to hide, but because I wanted to end this. I wanted to see his face when the results came back. I wanted to watch the doubt drain from his eyes, replaced by shame and regret. I wanted him to apologize, truly apologize, and spend the rest of our lives making up for what he'd put me through. I was so certain of my vindication that I didn't stop to consider what else that test might reveal. Vincent insisted on doing things his way. He didn't want a quiet, private test. He didn't want to order a kit online, swab our cheeks in the bathroom, and wait for results to arrive in a discreet envelope. No, Vincent wanted witnesses. "We'll do it at my parents' house," he announced a week after our fight. "During the Easter gathering, we'll have a professional come in, collect the samples properly, and everyone will see that this was done fairly." I stared at him in disbelief. "You want to do this in front of your family?" "I want everything above board. No questions later. No accusations that you tampered with the results." "Vincent, this is insane. This is our daughter we're talking about, not a court case." "If she's my daughter," he said, emphasizing the word in a way that made my stomach turn, "then you have nothing to worry about." I should have refused. I should have told him that if he wanted to humiliate me in front of his family, he could do it without my cooperation. I should have packed my bags, taken Lily, and walked out the door. But I didn't. Because somewhere inside me, underneath the hurt and the anger, I still loved him. I still believed that once he saw the truth, once he understood how wrong he'd been, we could rebuild what he was trying to destroy. So I agreed. And I walked into that Easter dinner with my head held high, determined to prove my innocence to everyone who mattered. The Crawford family estate was beautiful in spring. Daffodils lined the long driveway. Cherry blossoms framed the front entrance. The house itself was a Georgian colonial, white with black shutters, the kind of home that appeared in magazines and made people believe in the American dream. But that Easter, as I carried Lily up the front steps, the house felt less like a dream and more like a courtroom. Alina greeted us at the door, her smile tight, her eyes avoiding mine. She'd always been polite to me, but there was a distance there I'd never been able to bridge. A sense that I was tolerated rather than embraced. A feeling that, no matter how many years I spent as her daughter-in-law, I would never truly be a Crawford. "The family is in the drawing room," she said, taking Lily from my arms with the practiced ease of a grandmother. "The technician arrived 20 minutes ago." Technician. She said it so casually, as if we were discussing a plumber or an electrician, not a stranger who had been hired to determine whether my daughter belonged to this family. I walked into the drawing room and felt every eye turn toward me. Henry S.R. sat in his leather armchair by the fireplace, a glass of bourbon in his hand. Marcus stood by the window, looking uncomfortable. Vincent's aunt and uncle were on the sofa, their faces carefully neutral. And there, in the center of the room, sat a young woman in scrubs with a medical kit open on the coffee table. Vincent was already there, standing beside his father, his arms crossed over his chest. "Claudia," he said, as if greeting a business associate. "You're late." "I'm exactly on time," I replied, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. "Let's get this over with." The test itself was simple. A cotton swab on the inside of the cheek. A few seconds of discomfort, a plastic tube, a sealed bag. First Vincent. Then Lily, who squirmed and cried until a leaner soothed her with a cookie. Then me, though the technician explained that maternal DNA wasn't strictly necessary. The test was to compare Lily's genetic markers to Vincent's. "We'll have results in 5 to 7 business days," the technician said, packing up her kit. "They'll be sent directly to the address on file." "To my father's office," Vincent clarified. "I want this handled properly." I watched him as he spoke, searching for any trace of the man I'd married. The man who used to bring me flowers for no reason. Man who cried when Lily was born. The man who promised, in front of God and our families, to love and cherish me until death. That man was gone. In his place stood a stranger wearing my husband's face. The week that followed was the longest of my life. Vincent moved into the guest room, claiming he needed space to think. He barely spoke to me except when necessary. He looked at Lily with a strange mixture of love and suspicion, as if he couldn't decide whether to embrace her or push her away. I went through the motions of daily life, feeding Lily, bathing her, reading her stories at bedtime while my marriage crumbled around me. I thought about leaving. I thought about calling a lawyer. I thought about packing my bags and driving to my sister's house in Connecticut. But I stayed, because I wanted to see his face when those results came back. I wanted to be there when the truth shattered every cruel assumption he'd made. I wanted to watch him fall to his knees and beg for my forgiveness. I was so focused on my own vindication that I never considered what other secrets that test might uncover. The results arrived on a Friday. Henry S.R. called an emergency family meeting for Sunday afternoon. "To address the situation," he said, his voice grave over the phone. He didn't say what the situation was. He didn't need to. Vincent was practically vibrating with anticipation as we drove to his parents' house. He kept glancing at me, a smug little smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Whatever happens," he said, "I want you to know this isn't personal." I didn't trust myself to respond. We arrived at the estate just after 2 o'clock. The same family members from Easter were gathered in the drawing room, plus a few additions, Vincent's grandmother, who rarely left her nursing home, and a cousin I'd only met twice. Henry S.R. stood by the mantel, a white envelope in his hands. His face was unreadable. Eleanor sat on the sofa, her posture rigid, her fingers twisted together in her lap. I noticed she wasn't looking at her husband. She was staring at the floor, her face the color of ash. "Thank you all for coming," Henry S.R. began, his voice carrying the weight of 40 years in the courtroom. "As you know, my son Vincent requested a paternity test to determine whether Lily is biologically his child." He paused, lifting the envelope. "The results arrived at my office yesterday. I've reviewed them thoroughly." Another pause. He looked at Vincent. "I've also ordered an additional test, which was completed this morning on an expedited basis." Additional test? I saw confusion flicker across Vincent's face. This wasn't part of his plan. "What additional test?" Vincent demanded. "I didn't authorize. I authorized it," Henry S.R. interrupted, his voice sharp. "Because the initial results raised questions." The room went absolutely still. Eleanor made a small sound, not quite a gasp, not quite a whimper. Something in between, something that sounded like fear. Henry S.R. opened the envelope and pulled out 2 sheets of paper. "The first result is clear and unambiguous," he said. "Lily Crawford shares 50% of her DNA with Vincent Crawford. She is, without question, his biological daughter." Relief flooded through me. I felt my shoulders drop, felt tears spring to my eyes. I looked at Vincent, expecting to see shame on his face, but he wasn't looking at me. He was looking at his father, and his expression wasn't relief, it was confusion. "If she's my daughter," Vincent said slowly, "then what was the second test for?" Henry S.R. set the first paper down. "The second test," he said, "was to confirm something I noticed in the initial results, an anomaly in the paternal lineage markers." Eleanor stood up abruptly. "Henry," she said, her voice trembling. "Please, not like this." But Henry S.R. didn't even look at her. "The second test confirms," he continued, his voice like ice, "that while Lily is indeed Vincent's biological daughter, Vincent is not my biological son." The silence that followed was unlike anything I've ever experienced. It wasn't the comfortable silence of a lazy Sunday morning. It wasn't the tense silence before a storm. It was the silence of a world ending, The moment between the lightning strike and the thunder, when everything hangs suspended and you realize nothing will ever be the same. Vincent's face went through a series of transformations I'll never forget. Confusion, denial, realization, and then finally devastation. "What?" The word came out barely a whisper. "What did you say?" Henry S.R. stood motionless by the mantel, the papers still clutched in his hands. His jaw was tight, his eyes fixed on some distant point beyond the room. I realized, watching him, that he had rehearsed this moment. He had read those results in private, absorbed the blow alone, and then steeled himself to deliver it publicly. This was not the reaction of a man blindsided. This was a controlled demolition. "You are not my biological son, Vincent." Henry S.R.'s voice was steady, almost clinical. The DNA comparison was conclusive. Less than 1% margin of error. Eleanor collapsed back onto the sofa, her face buried in her hands. Her silver hair, always so perfectly styled, fell loose around her shoulders. She was shaking, her whole body trembling like a leaf in a hurricane. "Eleanor!" Henry S.R. turned toward his wife, and the coldness in his voice made me flinch. "Would you like to explain, or shall I?" She looked up at him, tears streaming down her face, mascara leaving dark tracks on her porcelain cheeks. "Henry, please, 40 years. He cut her off, his voice rising for the first time. 40 years of marriage, 40 years of building a life together, raising a family, trusting you, and it was all based on a lie. It wasn't like that. Then what was it like? He slammed the papers down on the mantel, making everyone in the room jump. "Tell me, Eleanor, tell our family, tell your son, or should I say, tell the man you let me raise as my son." The room had devolved into chaos. Vincent's grandmother was clutching her chest, demanding to know what was happening. Marcus was on his feet, his face pale, looking between his parents like a child watching his world shatter. The aunt and uncle were whispering urgently to each other. And the cousin, the one I barely knew, had pulled out her phone, probably texting the rest of the extended family. I stood frozen, Lily in my arms, watching the family I'd married into tear itself apart. And Vincent, my husband, the man who had dragged me here to be humiliated, had sunk into a chair, his head in his hands, completely silent. Eleanor's confession came out in pieces. Fragments of a story she had buried for 38 years, unearthed against her will in the most brutal way possible. "It was one time," she kept saying, her voice broken. "One time we were separated. You had left me for that woman in the city. I was alone. I was heartbroken. And Thomas. He was kind to me. Thomas." I saw the name land on Henry S.R. like a physical blow. His face went from cold to something worse, something hollow. "Thomas," he repeated. "Thomas Reed, my law partner, my best friend for 20 years. Eleanor nodded, unable to meet his eyes. "I didn't know I was pregnant until after you came back, until after we reconciled, and by then..." She trailed off, her voice dissolving into sobs. "By then, I couldn't tell you. I was afraid. Afraid you'd leave again, afraid I'd lose everything. So you lied to me." Henry S.R.'s voice was quiet now, which was somehow worse than the shouting. "You let me believe Vincent was mine. You let me raise him, love him, give him my name, my legacy, my firm. You let me build my entire life around a child who wasn't mine." "He is yours," Eleanor pleaded. "In every way that matters, he's yours. You raised him. You shaped him. Biology isn't. Don't." Henry S.R. held up a hand, stopping her. "Don't you dare tell me biology doesn't matter, not in this family. Not after 40 years of talking about bloodlines and legacy and the Crawford name." He turned away from her, facing the window, his back to the room. "I want a divorce." The words fell like stones into still water. Eleanor let out a cry, a raw, wounded sound that I felt in my chest. She stood up, reaching for her husband, but he stepped away from her touch. "Henry, please. We can talk about this. We can go to counseling. We can. There is nothing to talk about." He still wouldn't look at her. 40 years, Eleanor. 40 years of lies. Every anniversary, every Christmas, every family portrait, all of it tainted, all of it false. He shook his head slowly. "I'll have my attorney contact yours by the end of the week." And then he walked out of the room. In the aftermath, I expected someone to remember why we had gathered in the first place. I expected Vincent to look at me, to acknowledge that he had been wrong about me, wrong about Lily, wrong about everything. I expected some form of apology, even a small one, even a glance. But Vincent didn't look at me. He sat in that chair, motionless, staring at the floor. The man who had been so smug, so certain, so convinced that I was the liar, that man had vanished. In his place was someone hollowed out, a shell struggling to process the magnitude of what he'd just learned. His entire identity had been built on being Henry Crawford's son. The pressure to live up to his father's legacy. the expectation of excellence, the weight of the Crawford name. All of it had shaped him, driven him, defined him. And now he knew none of it was real. I should have felt satisfaction. After everything he had put me through, the accusations, the humiliation, the public spectacle of that paternity test, I should have felt vindicated. But watching him in that moment, I felt nothing but emptiness. And something else. Something that surprised me. Pity. The family scattered like leaves in a storm. Marcus took his grandmother back to the nursing home, his face drawn and pale. The aunt and uncle left without saying goodbye, their whispered conversations now spilling into phone calls as they hurried to their car. The cousin was nowhere to be seen, probably already posting on social media, sharing the scandal with whoever would listen. Elena remained on the sofa, crying softly, occasionally calling after her husband even though he had disappeared somewhere into the depths of the house. And I stood in the middle of it all, holding my daughter, wondering how I had become a bystander in my own story. "Vincent," I said his name softly, but he didn't respond. "Vincent, we should go." He looked up at me then, and the emptiness in his eyes made me take a step back. "Did you know?" he asked. "Did I know what?" "About my mother." "About Thomas Reed. Did you know?" I stared at him in disbelief. "How would I know? I wasn't even born when this happened. I didn't even know your family existed 38 years ago." He nodded slowly, but I could tell he wasn't really listening. His mind was somewhere else, somewhere deep and dark, processing a truth he had never imagined. "She lied to me," he said, more to himself than to me. "My whole life. Everything I believed about myself, about my family, about where I came from. All of it was a lie." I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to point out the irony that he had been so convinced I was the liar, so certain that I had deceived him, when all along the deception had come from his own mother. Part of me wanted to remind him that he had humiliated me in front of his entire family based on nothing but paranoid suspicion. But looking at him in that moment, I knew those words would mean nothing. He wasn't capable of hearing them. Not yet. "Let's go home," I said instead. "We can talk about everything tomorrow." He stood up slowly like an old man and followed me to the door. We drove home in complete silence. That night after I put Lily to bed, I found Vincent sitting in the dark in our living room. He hadn't turned on any lights, hadn't eaten dinner, hadn't even taken off his coat. He just sat there in his chair, staring at nothing, the weight of the day pressing down on him. I sat down across from him and waited. "I owe you an apology," he said finally. His voice was hoarse, barely audible. "I accused you of something terrible. I dragged you in front of my family. I made you prove your faithfulness like you were on trial." He looked at me and I saw tears glistening on his cheeks. "I'm sorry, Claudia, I'm so sorry." I let his words hang in the air for a long moment. "Why?" I asked. "Why did you believe I would do that to you? After 7 years of marriage, after everything we built together, why was your first instinct to assume I was lying?" He shook his head slowly. "I don't know. I saw Lily and she looked nothing like me, and something just broke. Some voice in my head kept whispering that she couldn't be mine, that I was being made a fool of." He wiped his face with the back of his hand. I think maybe I've always been afraid that I wasn't enough. That one day you'd realize you deserved better and leave. So you tried to push me away first." He nodded miserably. "I destroyed everything. My parents' marriage, my relationship with my father, or the man I thought was my father, my relationship with you." He looked at me with hollow eyes. "Is there anything left to save?" I thought about his question for a long time. I didn't answer him that night. I couldn't. The wounds were too fresh, the betrayal too raw. He had accused me of the worst thing a wife could be accused of. He had questioned our daughter's legitimacy in front of everyone who mattered to him. He had chosen suspicion over trust, paranoia over love. And yes, karma had delivered a spectacular punishment, but that didn't erase what he had done to me. "I need time," I told him, standing up from my chair. "I need to think about what I want, what's best for Lily, what's best for me." He nodded, not meeting my eyes. "I understand. You'll sleep in the guest room for now." "Okay." I left him sitting alone in the darkness and went upstairs to our bedroom, my bedroom now, and cried until I had nothing left. The days that followed were strange and surreal. Vincent moved through the house like a ghost, present but not really there. He went to work, came home, ate dinner in silence, and retreated to the guest room. He was gentle with Lily, almost painfully so, as if trying to make up for every moment of doubt he'd ever felt. I watched him with her sometimes, reading her stories, building block towers, making silly faces to earn her laughter. And I wondered if this softness had always been inside him, buried beneath the weight of trying to be a Crawford. Buried beneath the pressure of living up to a name that, as it turned out, was never really his. Meanwhile, the Crawford family was imploding. Henry S.R. filed for divorce within a week, just as he'd promised. Alina tried to fight it at first, hiring lawyers, requesting mediation, begging mutual friends to intervene. But Henry was immovable. 40 years of marriage and he couldn't forgive her. Not for the affair, not for the lie that followed. The estate went into legal limbo. The summer cottage was put up for sale. The family firm, Crawford and Associates, faced an uncertain future since Henry was now questioning whether Vincent should inherit his share. "You're not my blood," Henry told Vincent during one brutal phone call that I overheard. "Why should you inherit what I built for my family?" Vincent didn't argue. He just hung up the phone and sat staring at the wall for an hour. Marcus, surprisingly, became the bridge between the shattered pieces. He called Vincent almost every day, checking in, offering support. He visited Alina at the estate, making sure she was eating, helping her navigate the logistics of separation. He even reached out to Henry, trying to mediate, though his father refused to speak to anyone connected to that woman. "You know this isn't your fault," Marcus told Vincent one evening when he stopped by for dinner. "What Mom did, that was decades before either of us were born. You didn't choose any of this." Vincent shrugged, pushing food around his plate. "Doesn't matter, I'm still the reminder. Every time Dad looks at me, he sees the proof of her betrayal." He set down his fork. "I thought he loved me. Turns out he loved the idea of me, his firstborn son, his heir, his legacy. Now that's gone, and so is everything else." Marcus reached across the table and squeezed his brother's shoulder. "I'm still your brother. DNA doesn't change that." Vincent managed a weak smile. "Thanks, Mark." I watched them from the kitchen doorway, feeling a complicated mix of emotions. Anger at Vincent for what he'd done to me. Sympathy for what he was going through. And something else, a faint spark of hope that maybe, just maybe, the man I'd fallen in love with was still in there somewhere. 3 weeks after the revelation, I received an unexpected visitor. I was folding laundry in the living room when the doorbell rang. Lily was napping upstairs, and Vincent was at work, so I answered it alone. Alina stood on my doorstep. She looked 10 years older than she had at Easter. Her silver hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, her face bare of makeup. The elegant, composed matriarch I had known was gone, replaced by a woman who looked fragile and uncertain. "Claudia," she said, her voice soft. "May I come in?" I hesitated for a moment, then stepped aside. We sat in the living room, her on the sofa, me in the armchair across from her. She clutched her purse in her lap like a shield, her fingers worrying the leather strap. "I owe you an apology," she began. "I should have defended you when Vincent first started questioning Lily's paternity. I should have told him he was being ridiculous. Instead, I stayed silent. I let him humiliate you in front of the family." She looked down at her hands. "I was a coward." "Why did you stay silent?" I asked. "Did you think I was lying too?" She shook her head slowly. "No, I never doubted you, Claudia. You're a good woman, a faithful wife, a wonderful mother." She paused, her eyes filling with tears. "I stayed silent because I was terrified." Every time Vincent talked about DNA and paternity and proving things scientifically, I felt my secret getting closer to the surface. I kept hoping he would drop it, that he would come to his senses before. She trailed off, unable to finish. "Before the truth came out," I said quietly. She nodded. "I've kept this secret for 38 years. 38 years of looking at my son and seeing Thomas's eyes looking back at me. 38 years of pretending, of lying, of building a life on a foundation of sand." She wiped her cheeks with the back of her hand. "I always knew it would catch up with me eventually. I just didn't expect it to happen like this." I studied her for a long moment, this woman who had always seemed so perfect, so untouchable, so far above me on the Crawford family hierarchy. "Why Thomas Reed?" I asked. "Why risk everything for an affair?" Alina was quiet for a long time before answering. "Henry and I were separated," she said finally. "He'd been having an affair with his secretary, a woman named Dolers. It was a cliché, really. The successful lawyer and his beautiful young assistant. He moved out, told me he wanted a divorce, left me alone in that big house with a 2-year-old Marcus and a broken heart. I hadn't known any of this. In all my years as a Crawford, no one had ever mentioned that Henry and Alina had separated. Thomas was Henry's law partner. He came by the house to check on me, to help with paperwork, to make sure I had everything I needed. And one night, after too much wine and too many tears, She closed her eyes. It was one night, one terrible, wonderful, devastating night. And then Henry came back. He ended things with Dolers, begged me to take him back, promised it would never happen again. And you never told him about Thomas. How could I? He had just come home. He was trying to make amends. And then I realized I was pregnant and the timing. She shook her head. I convinced myself the baby was Henry's. I had to. The alternative was too terrifying to consider. I thought about the weight she must have carried all these years. The fear every time Vincent and Henry stood side by side. The prayers that no one would look too closely, ask too many questions. It didn't excuse what she'd done, but it made her human. I'm sorry, Alina said again, meeting my eyes. For everything. For staying silent when my son accused you. For letting my fear control me. For being too weak to tell the truth until it was ripped out of me. She paused. I know I have no right to ask anything of you, but I hope someday you might find it in your heart to forgive me. I looked at her, this broken woman who had once seemed so far above me, and felt something shift in my chest. I don't know if I can forgive you yet, I said honestly, but I'm willing to try. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. That's more than I deserve. After Alina left, I sat alone in the quiet house thinking about secrets. The secrets we keep to protect ourselves. The secrets we keep to protect others. The secrets that fester in the dark, growing larger and more dangerous with every passing year. Alina's secret had destroyed her marriage. It had shattered her son's identity. It had torn apart a family that had seemed, from the outside, so perfect and so strong. But here's the thing about secrets. They have a way of coming to light. No matter how deep you bury them, no matter how carefully you guard them, they always find their way to the surface. The truth will out, as they say. And when it does, the question becomes, what do you do next? Vincent came home early that evening. He found me sitting on the back porch, watching the sun set over the Brooklyn rooftops, a cup of tea growing cold in my hands. Can I sit with you? He asked. I nodded. He settled into the chair beside me, leaving a careful distance between us. We sat in silence for a long moment, watching the sky turn from gold to orange to deep, bruised purple. My mother called me, he said finally. She told me she came to see you today. She did. She said you were kind to her, kinder than she deserved. I shrugged. She's hurting, we're all hurting. Vincent turned to look at me, his face illuminated by the fading light. Claudia, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I know I don't deserve a second chance, but I want you to know that I see everything. How wrong I was, how much I hurt you, how I nearly destroyed the best thing that ever happened to me because I was too afraid to trust it. I didn't respond, just kept watching the sunset. I spent my whole life trying to be good enough, he continued. Good enough for my father, good enough for the Crawford name, good enough to prove I belonged. And when Lily was born, when she looked nothing like me, all those old fears came rushing back. I thought the universe was finally proving what I'd always suspected, that I was a fraud, that I didn't deserve any of it. He laughed bitterly. Turns out I was right. I'm a fraud, just not in the way I thought. I finally turned to face him. You're not a fraud, Vincent. You're a man who was lied to his entire life. A man who built his identity on a foundation someone else cracked before you were even born. I paused, choosing my next words carefully. But that doesn't excuse what you did to me. You had a choice. You could have trusted me. You could have talked to me privately, worked through your fears together. Instead, you chose to humiliate me. You chose to make me prove my faithfulness in front of your entire family. He nodded, accepting the rebuke. I know. And I'll spend the rest of my life making up for it if you let me. I didn't give him an answer that night. Some decisions can't be rushed. Some wounds need time to breathe before you know if they'll heal or scar. And the wound Vincent had inflicted on our marriage, on me, was deep enough that I couldn't see the bottom yet. But I didn't say no either. And maybe that was enough. For now. The weeks that followed brought more revelations, more confrontations, more pieces of the Crawford family puzzle falling into place. Thomas Reed, the man who was apparently Vincent's biological father, had died 8 years ago. A heart attack at 67, quick and sudden. He'd never married, never had children, at least none that anyone knew about. He'd spent his final years alone in a condo in Florida, estranged from most of his former colleagues and friends, including Henry Crawford. They had a falling out about 15 years ago, Marcus told us during one of his visits. Dad never said what it was about, just stopped mentioning Thomas's name one day. I always assumed it was some kind of business dispute. Now we knew better. Had Henry suspected something, even back then? Had he looked at Vincent one day and seen something that didn't quite fit? A gesture, an expression, a way of laughing that reminded him of his former best friend? Or had it been something else entirely, some instinct too painful to name? We would probably never know. Henry refused to discuss it. He'd moved out of the family estate and into a downtown apartment, cutting off contact with everyone except his lawyers. The divorce proceedings were brutal and swift. He wanted nothing to do with Alina, nothing to do with the life they'd built together. 40 years of marriage, erased in a matter of weeks. Vincent reached out to Thomas Reed's family. I didn't know about it until after the fact. He came home one evening with a manila envelope and a strange expression on his face, not quite sad, not quite hopeful, something in between. I found his sister, he said, setting the envelope on the kitchen table. Thomas's sister, Margaret, she's 72, lives in Vermont. I wrote to her a month ago, explaining everything. I stared at the envelope. She wrote back. He nodded, pulling out a handwritten letter and several photographs. She says she always wondered about me. Apparently, Thomas told her once years ago when he was drunk that he'd made a terrible mistake, that there was a child somewhere who would never know him. She didn't understand what he meant at the time. Vincent's voice cracked slightly. Now she does. He spread the photographs on the table. A young Thomas Reed, maybe 30 years old, standing on a beach somewhere. Thomas at 40, accepting an award at a legal conference. Thomas at 60, gray-haired and thinner, sitting on a porch with a dog at his feet. I looked at the pictures, then at Vincent. The resemblance was unmistakable. The shape of the jaw, the set of the eyes, the way one corner of the mouth lifted slightly higher than the other when smiling. Vincent had spent his whole life wondering why he didn't look like Henry Crawford. Now he knew. Are you going to meet her? I asked. Margaret, he nodded slowly. She invited me to visit. She says she has more photos, more stories, she says. He paused, swallowing hard. She says she'd like to know her nephew. Nephew. The word hung in the air between us, strange and new. Vincent had spent 38 years as Henry Crawford's son. Now he was learning to be Thomas Reed's. It was a strange kind of rebirth, painful and disorienting, but also, in its own way, liberating. He made the trip to Vermont 3 weeks later. I didn't go with him. We weren't at that point yet, the point where I could stand beside him as his wife, supporting him through this journey of rediscovery. I was still figuring out what I wanted our marriage to be, whether it could survive what he'd done to it. But I told him I hoped he found what he was looking for. And when he came back, something had changed. He was lighter somehow. The heaviness that had weighed him down since the Easter revelation had lifted slightly. He smiled more easily. He laughed at Lily's antics without that shadow of doubt in his eyes. He moved through the house like someone who was finally learning to breathe again. Margaret showed me everything, he told me the night he returned. Photo albums, letters, old home movies. Thomas as a child, as a young man, as a lawyer just starting out. He paused, his voice thick with emotion. She said I have his laugh, his way of tilting my head when I'm thinking about something. She said it was like seeing her brother again, just for a moment. I watched him as he spoke, and I saw something I hadn't seen in months. Peace. Not complete peace, there was still too much pain, too much upheaval for that, but the beginning of it. The first fragile shoots of acceptance pushing up through the scorched earth of his identity. Did it help? I asked. Meeting her. He thought about it for a long moment. It helped me understand that I'm not nothing, he said finally. That I come from somewhere, even if it's not where I thought. That there are people in this world who share my blood, my history, my face. He looked at me, his eyes glistening. I spent so long trying to be a Crawford, trying to live up to Henry's expectations, his legacy, his name, and now... He trailed off, searching for words. Now you get to figure out who you actually are, I finished for him. He nodded. Exactly. The divorce between Henry and Alina was finalized in September. It was a quiet affair, no dramatic courtroom scenes, no public battles. Just signatures on paper, the division of assets, and the legal dissolution of 4 decades of partnership. Alina kept the family estate, though she talked about selling it. Too many memories, she said. Too many ghosts in the hallways. Henry got the apartment, the investment portfolio, and full control of the law firm. He also made it clear that Vincent was no longer welcome as a partner. You can keep your current clients, Henry told Vincent in a cold, formal letter. But your name will be removed from the letterhead. You are not and have never been a Crawford. I will not have my firm associated with another man's offspring. Vincent showed me the letter with a bitter smile. 40 years of raising me, he said. 40 years of birthday parties and little league games and school plays and graduation ceremonies. And this is what it comes down to. I'm another man's offspring. I didn't know what to say. The cruelty of it was breathtaking, not just the rejection, but the way Henry had erased everything they'd shared. Every memory, every moment of connection, every time Vincent had called him Dad and believed it meant something. But I also understood in a complicated way why Henry felt the way he did. He had been betrayed. Profoundly, fundamentally betrayed by the woman he loved and trusted. And every time he looked at Vincent, he saw the proof of that betrayal staring back at him. It wasn't fair to Vincent. It wasn't right. But grief rarely is. Vincent opened his own practice that winter. A small office in downtown Brooklyn, just him and a paralegal and a receptionist who doubled as an office manager. He specialized in family law, an ironic choice, given everything that had happened, but also somehow fitting. I understand now, he told me, what it feels like to have your family torn apart, to lose the people you thought you could count on, to have to rebuild from nothing. He paused, looking around his modest office. I want to help other people through that. I want to be the lawyer I wish we'd had. I visited him at the office one afternoon, bringing Lily to see where Daddy worked. She toddled around the waiting room, fascinated by the potted plants and the water cooler, while Vincent showed me the framed photos on his desk. Lily as a newborn, Lily at her first birthday, Lily and me at the park last summer, and one new photo I hadn't seen before. Thomas Reed, young and smiling, standing on that beach decades ago. Margaret sent it to me, Vincent explained. She said I should have something to remind me where I come from, both sides. I looked at the photo, at the man who had unknowingly fathered my husband, who had carried the secret of Vincent's existence to his grave, and felt a strange sense of closure. The past was the past. It couldn't be changed or undone, but it could be understood, accepted, integrated into the story of who we were and who we were becoming. That night, after Lily was asleep, Vincent and I sat together on the back porch. It had become our place, the spot where we talked about hard things, where we slowly, painfully worked through the wreckage of what he'd done and what had been done to him. I've been thinking, I said, breaking the comfortable silence. About what? About us, about whether there's still in us worth saving. Vincent went very still beside me, and I took a deep breath. You hurt me, Vincent, deeply. You accused me of something terrible, and you did it in the most public, humiliating way possible. That's not something I can just forget. He nodded, not trying to defend himself. But, I continued, I've also watched you these past few months. I've watched you lose everything you thought you were, your father, your name, your place in the family, your career at the firm. I've watched you grieve and struggle and slowly put yourself back together. And I've seen something I didn't see before. What? Humility. I turned to look at him. For the first time since I've known you, you're not trying to prove anything to anyone. You're not performing, you're just being, and I think I like who you're becoming. Vincent's eyes filled with tears. Does that mean? It means I'm willing to try, really try, not just coexist in the same house, but actually rebuild what we had, or maybe build something new, something better. He reached for my hand, hesitant, like he wasn't sure he was allowed. I let him take it. I won't let you down, he said, his voice breaking. I swear to you, Claudia, I will spend the rest of my life earning back your trust. I squeezed his hand. I know you will. Rebuilding a marriage is not like rebuilding a house. With a house, you can see the damage clearly. You can point to the cracked foundation, the broken windows, the walls that need to come down. You can hire contractors, draw up plans, set a timeline for completion. But a marriage, the damage is invisible. It lives in the spaces between words, in the flinch when someone reaches for you, in the doubt that whispers in your ear at 3 a.m. when you can't sleep. Vincent and I started therapy that January. It was his idea, actually. He found a counselor who specialized in couples recovering from betrayal, not infidelity, but the broader category of trust violations. Dr. Amara Washington, a soft-spoken woman in her 50s with kind eyes and an office full of plants. Tell me why you're here, she said during our first session, looking between us. Vincent spoke first. Because I almost destroyed my marriage. I accused my wife of something terrible, publicly humiliated her in front of my family, and caused pain I can never fully undo. He paused, his voice steady but raw. And I want to understand why I did it. What was broken inside me that made me capable of hurting the person I love most in the world? Dr. Washington nodded, then turned to me. And you, Claudia, why are you here? I thought about the question for a long moment. Because I want to know if forgiveness is possible, I said finally. Real forgiveness, not just saying the words, but actually letting go of the anger, the hurt, the fear that it could happen again. I glanced at Vincent. I love my husband, at least I love who I thought he was. I'm here to find out if that man still exists. It was the most honest I'd been in months. Therapy was hard, harder than I expected. We dug into places I didn't want to go. Vincent's childhood, growing up under Henry's exacting expectations. My own fears of abandonment, rooted in a father who left when I was 12. The patterns we'd fallen into without realizing it, me as the peacekeeper, him as the performer, both of us building walls instead of bridges. You were both hiding, Dr. Washington observed during one session. Vincent, you were hiding your insecurities behind a mask of confidence. And Claudia, you were hiding your needs, afraid that expressing them would push Vincent away. I didn't want to be demanding, I admitted. I saw how hard he worked to please his father. I didn't want to be another person he had to perform for. So instead, you performed too, Dr. Washington said gently. The perfect wife, the understanding partner, never complaining, never asking for too much. I felt tears spring to my eyes. I just wanted to make him happy. I know. Dr. Washington leaned forward. But here's the thing about performances, they're exhausting, and eventually the mask slips for both of you. Vincent reached for my hand. I never wanted you to perform for me, he said, his voice thick. I wanted you to be real. I wanted us to be real. Then why couldn't you trust me? The question came out sharper than I intended. When Lily was born, when you started doubting, why didn't you just talk to me? Why did you let it fester until you convinced yourself I was a liar? He was quiet for a long moment. Because I was already convinced that I didn't deserve you, he said finally. That eventually you'd figure out what a fraud I was and leave. And when Lily didn't look like me, it felt like confirmation, like proof that the universe was finally catching up to me. But I never saw you as a fraud, I said, tears streaming down my face now. I saw you as my husband, the man I chose. The man I wanted to build a life with. I know that now. His own eyes were wet. I just wish I'd known it then. The work continued through the winter and into the spring. Slowly, painfully, we learned to communicate differently, to speak our fears instead of acting on them, to ask for reassurance instead of demanding proof, to trust that love, real love, could survive doubt and distance and even betrayal. It wasn't a straight line. There were setbacks, nights when I couldn't bear to be touched, days when Vincent retreated into himself, moments when we wondered if we were fooling ourselves by trying to save something that was already broken. But there were also breakthroughs. The night Vincent told me, for the first time, about the pressure he'd felt growing up as Henry Crawford's son. The performance of perfection that was expected of him from the moment he could walk. The constant, gnawing fear that one day he'd be exposed as not good enough. I think that's why I was so obsessed with the paternity test, he admitted. It wasn't really about you or Lily. It was about me, about proving that I belonged somewhere to someone. And when the test revealed the truth about your father, he laughed bitterly. I got exactly what I deserved. I wanted proof of who I was. I got it, just not the proof I expected. I reached for his hand. You know who you are, Vincent. You're Lily's father. You're my husband. You're a man who made terrible mistakes and is trying to make them right. I paused, squeezing his fingers. The DNA doesn't define you. What you do next does. He looked at me with something like wonder in his eyes. How can you still believe in me after everything? Because I've seen you change, I said simply. I've watched you face the worst truths about yourself and your family, and instead of running, you've stayed, you've fought, you've done the work. I smiled slightly. That's not the man who demanded that paternity test. That's someone new, someone better. Someone you could love again. I considered the question carefully. Someone I'm already learning to love again, I said. Differently than before, but maybe that's okay. Maybe different is what we need. Easter came again. A full year since that terrible day at the Crawford estate, when Vincent's cruel demand had unraveled secrets that had been buried for decades. We didn't go to the family gathering. There wasn't a family gathering to go to. The Crawfords were scattered now, each nursing their own wounds, trying to figure out who they were without the structure that had once held them together. Instead, we had our own Easter. Just the three of us, me, Vincent, and Lily, in our Brooklyn brownstone. I made honey-glazed ham and roasted vegetables. Vincent hid plastic eggs around the backyard for Lily to find. We sat on the back porch in the spring sunshine, watching our daughter toddle through the grass with her basket, shrieking with delight at every discovery. It was quiet, simple, ordinary, and it was perfect. I keep thinking about last year, Vincent said, watching Lily examine a bright pink egg. About the person I was, the things I said, the damage I caused. Don't, I said gently. Not today. I have to. He turned to look at me. Because I need you to know I will never be that person again. I will never doubt you. I will never put you through anything like that again. I know. Do you? His eyes searched mine. Really? I thought about the past year, the therapy sessions, the late-night conversations, the slow, painful rebuilding of trust, the way Vincent had transformed, not perfectly, not completely, but genuinely. Yes, I said, I really do. He let out a breath I didn't realize he'd been holding. "Thank you," he whispered, "for giving me another chance. For not walking away when you had every right to." "Thank you for earning it," I replied. We sat together in comfortable silence, watching our daughter play, feeling the warmth of the sun on our faces. Alina came to visit that afternoon. She looked better than she had a year ago, still fragile, still wounded, but no longer shattered. She'd started seeing a therapist of her own. She'd reconnected with old friends who had drifted away during her marriage. She was slowly, carefully rebuilding a life that didn't revolve around Henry Crawford. "I brought something for Lily," she said, handing me a gift bag. Inside was a beautiful hand-knit sweater in soft lavender wool. "You made this?" I asked, surprised. She nodded, a small smile on her face. "I've been taking classes, knitting, pottery, watercolor painting, things I always wanted to try but never had time for." She paused. "It's strange starting over at my age, but also liberating." I hugged her, something I couldn't have imagined doing a year ago. "I'm glad you're finding your way," I said. "So am I," she pulled back, looking at me with genuine warmth. "And I'm glad you and Vincent are finding yours. You're good for him, Claudia. You always have been." Later, after Alina had gone and Lily was napping, Vincent found me in the kitchen, washing dishes. "Can I ask you something?" he said, leaning against the counter. "Of course. Do you think you'll ever fully forgive me? Not just manage the hurt or learn to live with it, but actually forgive me?" I set down the dish I was holding and turned to face him. "I've been thinking about that a lot," I admitted. "About what forgiveness really means, and I think it's not a destination, it's a journey. Some days I feel like I've forgiven you completely. Other days the anger comes back and I have to work through it all over again." "That sounds exhausting." "It is sometimes." I reached out and touched his face. "But it's also getting easier. The angry days are fewer, the good days are more, and I really believe that eventually the forgiveness will be complete." He covered my hand with his. "What can I do to help?" "Just keep being the man you've become," I said. "Keep showing up, keep doing the work, keep loving me and Lily with everything you have." "That's easy," he said, pulling me into his arms. "That's the easiest thing in the world." 2 years have passed since that Easter. 2 years since a paternity test meant to humiliate me ended up exposing a secret that had been buried for nearly 4 decades. 2 years since the Crawford family shattered like glass dropped on marble. 2 years since my marriage nearly ended, and then, slowly, painfully, beautifully began again. Lily is 4 now. She has my curly hair and her father's laugh, that distinctive laugh, the one that tilts slightly higher on one side, the one that came from Thomas Reed and now lives on in my daughter. She's fearless and curious and full of questions about everything. Why is the sky blue? Where do butterflies go when it rains? Why does Grandma Alina live alone now? That last question is harder to answer. We've told her, in simple terms, that families sometimes change, that people who love each other can still decide to live apart, that Grandpa Henry is taking some time to himself, and that's okay. She accepts this with the easy grace of childhood. She doesn't know about betrayals and secrets and DNA tests that destroy worlds. She just knows that she has a mother and father who love her, a Grandma Alina who knits her sweaters, and an Uncle Marcus who lets her eat too much ice cream when he babysits. That's enough for now. The complicated truths can wait until she's old enough to understand them, if she ever needs to understand them at all. Henry Crawford died last autumn. A stroke, sudden and massive. He was alone in his apartment when it happened. The cleaning lady found him 2 days later, sitting in his leather armchair, a glass of bourbon still on the table beside him. He was 74 years old. The funeral was small and strange. A handful of former colleagues, a few distant relatives, Marcus and Vincent, standing side by side in the front row, both wearing expressions I couldn't quite read. Alina didn't come. "I can't," she told me when I called to ask if she wanted us to pick her up. "I grieved that marriage 2 years ago. I can't grieve it again." I understood. Some losses are too complete to revisit. Vincent was quiet on the drive home from the cemetery. Lily was with a babysitter, so it was just the 2 of us in the car, the silence heavy with everything that couldn't be said. "I don't know how to feel," he admitted finally. "He raised me. He taught me how to throw a baseball, how to tie a tie, how to argue a case in court. He was my father in every way that mattered until he decided I wasn't his son anymore." "Both things can be true," I said gently. "He was your father, and he hurt you deeply. You can grieve the man who raised you while also being angry at the man who rejected you." Vincent nodded slowly. "The last time I spoke to him was 6 months ago. I called to wish him happy birthday. He let it go to voicemail. Never called back. I'm sorry. Me too." He stared out the window at the gray November sky. I kept hoping, that one day he'd come around, that he'd realize DNA doesn't erase 38 years of being my father, that he'd pick up the phone and say he was sorry. But he didn't. No, he didn't. We drove in silence for a while longer. "I've been thinking," Vincent said eventually, "about what I want to teach Lily, about family, about forgiveness, about what it means to love someone." "What do you want to teach her?" He considered the question carefully. "That family isn't just about blood, it's about choice, about showing up day after day even when it's hard, about forgiving people when they hurt you, really forgiving them, not just saying the words." He paused. "And about not letting fear turn you into someone you're not proud of." I reached over and took his hand. "You've already taught her those things," I said. "You teach her every day just by being her father." He squeezed my fingers. "I hope so. I really hope so." Marcus got married last spring. A beautiful ceremony in a garden upstate, surrounded by flowers and sunlight and all the people who loved him. His bride, Sophia, was a kindergarten teacher with a warm smile and an easy laugh. They'd met at a grief support group, of all places, both of them trying to process the loss of family members and the strange new shapes their lives had taken. Vincent was the best man. He stood beside his brother at the altar, straight and proud, and when Marcus turned to him with tears in his eyes, Vincent pulled him into a hug that said everything words couldn't. "I'm proud of you," I heard him whisper, "and I love you no matter what." Marcus hugged him back just as fiercely. "I love you too, always." Watching them, I felt something settle in my chest, a sense of completion, of healing. The Crawford family as it once existed was gone. Henry was dead. Eleanor was rebuilding her life alone. The estate had been sold, the summer cottage transferred to strangers. The name that had once meant so much now belonged to no one in particular. But out of the ashes, something new had grown. Marcus and Vincent closer than ever. Sophia bringing new life and laughter into the family. Lily carrying the best of all her ancestors, Crawford and Reed, known and unknown, into the future. And me. Standing in the garden, watching my husband dance with my daughter at his brother's wedding, feeling the sun on my face and the love in my heart. We had survived. More than that, we had transformed. Eleanor passed away peacefully in her sleep 3 months ago. She'd been declining slowly, her body worn down by age and stress and the weight of secrets she'd carried for too long. But in her final years, she'd found a kind of peace. She'd reconciled with both her sons. She'd made amends where she could and accepted forgiveness where it was offered. The night before she died, I visited her in the hospice. She was thin and frail, barely recognizable as the elegant woman who'd once intimidated me with her perfect dinner parties and her immaculate home. But her eyes were clear, and her grip was surprisingly strong when she took my hand. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "For what?" "For giving my son another chance. For not letting him become his father, bitter and unforgiving, dying alone with nothing but his pride." She squeezed my fingers. "You saved him, Claudia. You saved us all." I didn't know what to say, so I just held her hand and let her talk. "I made so many mistakes," she continued. "The affair, the lie, all those years of pretending. But you know what I regret most?" "What?" "Staying silent when Vincent accused you. Letting my fear of exposure override my loyalty to you." Her eyes filled with tears. "You were innocent, you were family, and I let you twist in the wind to protect my own secret." "I forgave you for that a long time ago," I said softly. "I know." She managed a weak smile. "But I needed to say it before the end." She died the next morning, surrounded by her sons, at peace with herself at last. I think about legacy a lot these days. Not the kind of legacy Henry Crawford cared about, bloodlines and family names and portraits hung in gilded frames. But the other kind. The kind that lives in the choices we make, the love we give, the people we help become. Vincent's legacy is not his DNA. It's not Thomas Reed's eyes or Henry Crawford's name. It's the man he chose to become after everything fell apart. The husband who earned back my trust. The father who shows up for his daughter every single day. The brother who stands by Marcus through every storm. Eleanor's legacy is not her secret or her shame. It's the courage she found at the end of her life to face the truth, make amends, and let go of the fear that had controlled her for so long. And my legacy, I'm still writing it. But I know this much. I am not the victim of this story. I am not the woman who was publicly humiliated by her husband's cruel accusations. I am not defined by the worst moment of my marriage. I am the woman who survived that moment. I am the woman who chose to stay when leaving would have been easier. I am the woman who rebuilt her marriage, not because she had to, but because she believed it was worth saving. I am the woman who forgave, Not because forgiveness was easy, but because holding on to anger was harder. Last week, Lily asked me a question. We were sitting on the back porch, the place where Vincent and I have had all our most important conversations, watching the fireflies dance in the twilight. "Mommy," she said, her voice small and curious, "what's DNA?" I looked at her surprised. "Where did you hear that word?" "Uncle Marcus was talking to Daddy about it. He said something about a test and secrets." She frowned, her little forehead wrinkling. "What does it mean?" I thought carefully about how to answer. "DNA is like a recipe," I said finally. "It tells your body how to make you, what color your eyes should be, what color your hair, whether you'll be tall or short. Everyone has DNA, and it comes from your parents." Lily nodded slowly. "So my DNA came from you and Daddy." "That's right. And I have Daddy's laugh," she said proudly. "Grandma Alina told me so." "You do," I smiled. "You have your daddy's laugh and my curly hair and your great-grandmother's nose." She seemed satisfied with this answer. Then after a moment, "Mommy, do you and Daddy love each other?" My heart clenched. "Yes, sweetheart, we love each other very much. Forever." I looked at my daughter, this beautiful, curious, fearless child who carried pieces of so many people inside her, and felt tears prick my eyes. "Forever," I promised. She smiled, content, and went back to watching the fireflies. And I sat there in the gathering darkness, grateful for everything we'd been through. Grateful for the breaking and the healing. Grateful for second chances. Grateful for love that survives the fire. So here I am at the end of this story. A story that began with my husband's cruel accusation and ended with something I never expected, a marriage stronger than it was before. A family rebuilt from the ashes of secrets and lies. A love that was tested by fire and emerged, somehow, more precious for the burning. I won't pretend the journey was easy. There were nights I wanted to give up. Moments when the anger felt too heavy to carry. Days when I looked at Vincent and wondered if I'd made a terrible mistake by staying. But I also knew, deep in my bones, that walking away would have been the wrong choice. Not for everyone. Some betrayals are too deep to forgive, some wounds too grievous to heal. Every woman has to make that decision for herself, and there is no judgment here for those who choose to leave. But for me, in my situation with my husband, forgiveness was the path forward. Not because Vincent deserved it, not because I'm some kind of saint, but because holding on to the anger was destroying me. Because I wanted my daughter to grow up in a home filled with love, not resentment. Because I believed, against all odds, that people could change. And Vincent did change. He became the husband I always knew he could be. The husband he was too afraid to be when he was performing for his father's approval. The husband who shows up every day to earn the trust he once shattered. I want to ask you something if you're still with me. Have you ever been in a situation where someone you loved hurt you deeply? Where you had to decide whether to walk away or stay and fight? What did you do? And if you're in that situation right now, if you're lying awake at night, wondering whether forgiveness is possible, whether trust can be rebuilt, whether love can survive betrayal, I want you to know something. You are not alone. Whatever you decide, it's the right decision for you. No one else can walk your path or carry your pain. Only you know what you can live with, what you can heal from, what your heart is capable of forgiving. Trust yourself. You are stronger than you know. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for staying with me through the pain and the healing, the breaking and the rebuilding. If this story touched you, I'd love to hear from you. Leave a comment below. Share your own experiences. Tell me what you would have done in my place. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to this channel. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss new stories. Your support means everything. It's what allows me to keep sharing these stories, to keep building this community of women who understand what it means to survive. Until next time, take care of yourselves. Hold your loved ones close. And remember, no matter what storms you're facing, no matter what secrets are threatening to tear your world apart, you have the strength to weather them. You have the strength to heal. You have the strength to begin again. This is Claudia, and this has been my story.